Professor in Denmark, Aarhus University, where I'm focusing on human-computer interaction, extended reality, that intersections. So I guess that's kind of pretty relevant, but I'm not a bit more on the technical side of it. And I want to show you a bit of research we've been doing. Also the research I've been doing 10 years ago, doing my PhD. And so our research team is stuff we did. You can see now the devices from Apple, from also Google, the Android XR, collaborating with Google. And like the recent new generation of XR devices are adopting our internet. It's kind of very exciting at the moment. So for the students that I'm working with. And I'll tell you a little bit of how we got there, why am I motivated to think of this. But yeah. So looking back at the whole kind of history of computing, there's probably a lot more to say than this. And you could even look at what happened before we had digital devices. And in some way, there are tools enhancing our capabilities of what we can do with our hands. Also, that's a big focus in our work. But you can see that there was a mouse keyboard, right? That's how it started. And it became kind of gradually easier in some way, the interface, more spatial, gestures, multi-touch screens. And now extended reality, we're going to the 3D world, which kind of is closer to reality. But the truth is also all the previous stuff is still there. And it kind of, with every new device, new category gets. Yes. This morning I talked with a few of you in the weekend, and some of you mentioned, like some of the new generation of kids don't even know how to use a mouse. While there's probably a bunch of people who, have their smartwatch, their phone, their tablet, and everything on them and go around. When I'm at home in my living room, there's a TV. Sometimes I have my laptop on there's my switch to my phone. So it's like a lot of devices, and then there could be smart home appliances, smart lights, fridges, and so on, right? So it's a lot. And that's what I see as the complexity is kind of rising there. So around 2013, I wanted to do human-computer interaction research, starting a PhD, and thought, what should I really focus on? And I wasn't interested in thinking, oh, that's one specific device, or that's the future of the device that we might see. I wanted to be broader than that. So, what's this picture show? It's actually something about, started with my mom. So that's in London, actually here. Yesterday night, after our dinner, I went and visited that because I have some very specific memory to that. It's kind of the starting point of research that I've been focusing on for almost a decade now. And Mom, so we had a vacation here in London, sightseeing. And for 3 days, my mom was just talking all the time. I got so annoyed that at some point I told her, okay, I can't do this anymore. That evening we split up. I was very emotional. I didn't know what to do. And I normally, what I do then is just, I think of work or something, right? So what I did is thought of what can I do for my PhD? And I was sitting here at this monument, Shaftesbury Memorial Zone, being just pen and paper and write it down. Okay, what type of new concept could work across all of these devices? So how can we advance things, all the devices we already have? How potential paradigms that also apply for future devices that will come up. So of course I was like just dreaming. That's like quite a big thing to think of. But since the research group I've been working on has done a lot with eye tracking, I was then, oh no, the animations don't work. Yeah. But I was thinking that one thing that is always there when we interact with our hands are our eyes. And of course, we need to visually perceive the information. The hands are doing the actual input to it. But, you know, can we open this up more? Can we integrate both for the control of computing? And because that's something that is, you know, yeah, for all the previous devices that are completely hands controlled. So the old paradigm, but there could be also a new paradigm that kind of integrates with the old paradigm, that integrates where we are looking, what we're interested in, our attention. So, no videos are working. That's really so what
you open in the top left, maybe there is some yeah, maybe something there.
Web. Can't allow it.
Not your computers.
Yeah, that looks a little better. My time is already running.
I guess this time doesn't count.
Or I won't count it.
Well, I started with
See the stakes would be helpful.
I think we go back to the slideshow. It'll load.
where was it? But in my PhD, then I started my first project, and I'm thinking, okay, how can I use where I'm looking with basic commands of our hands? And since everyone had a smartphone at the time, I was involved.
You're trying to find play for you.
So gestures. What about that concept where every gesture, every touch on a screen, will the usability is really crap. That's a big challenge.
Maybe there's too much tabs open.
We don't talk about other people's tabs.
It's so sensitive.
Stop shaming.
Family, fancy whatever.
That's a comment on the future of things that we know next.
What are we going to do? Future will be delivered in
A video.
everything.
Right, so you have.
I didn't think I would get this. I tried to think of solve it half an hour. Depending.
Taking a shit.
iPad solved it.
Clearly someone involved in punch and then.
Available and I'm.
I'll let you show it.
Last night.
You're looking for a USB
This video is-
HDMI. He has a Mac with an HDMI.
Yeah, this is
Slow.
I'll just do it. I'll just have to share.
10 seconds.
Really hard. Yes. Okay, everyone.
Show it every night.
Here we are.
Yeah, here we are.
Hey. Okay.
You still want to
Not playing.
The bottom on the right hand side.
Good imagination. Talk us through.
And you click, yeah.
They start the slideshows.
We should have a whole symposium on just what's going on with Microsoft.
God.
We have to.
You need to.
So there's an eye tracker at the bottom of the tablet.
To the 90s.
Red circle is for you to see where I'm looking, actually. So there was 2016, 15. I was working on, okay, we have a tablet. How can we just instantly select where we're looking? So every touch gesture happens where I look. So as you can see, no, I can do the same things as I would do with normal touching, but I can just use very simple thumb movements. So it minimizes kind of the effort. There's no effort with actually touching things, but it's even less somehow. So there was some kind of new feeling of interacting with it. And this we on the later work extended that to the 3D space. So thinking of there's objects around us, we can look at things, and now it's a simple extension from touching is now pinching. So this also works quite well. And we had this prototype at the time with an eye tracker attached to the VR device, and inside the thing, and a hand tracker on the device to kind of get the feeling of it. And these are like 2 videos of probably hundreds of them to the point of making it as seamless as you can see that I can build stuff. Although, yeah, in the end, I'm crashing the thing, but you can see that there is some potential to it. And my supervisor just recently told me that he felt like I'm obsessed about this topic, eyes and hands. I don't think so. It's just about in 20 papers that. And so you, of course, very specific concepts. I was very happy to see them actually being adopted in industry. Apple Vision Pro famously used this looking and pinching, but also something else went completely under the radar that I think is also a key mechanism to make it work. It's the direct and indirect gestures. So if you look at the Vision OS guidelines, you can actually see exactly the same terminology. But the idea is that I can touch things. So in the same interface, I can use my hand to do it as I know from the old paradigm, but I can also at the same time just look at things and tap from far away. And this kind of coexistence is important. And this is also what you see nowadays with the devices that can directly act on them or use this indirect eye-based approach. So, but of course, that work was around 2017. So that's the state of the art we have now. We've done already a lot more work in this direction. So we've kind of looking nowadays with, now I have a team, PhD students looking, what is even the more next part in this XR interface. Some examples of integrating this direct and indirect interaction for 2 hands, and studying this and understanding kind of how our 2-handed capabilities might be improved. We have a more advanced paradigm where you don't have to move objects with your hand anymore. You can just completely coordinate your eyes with your hand. So that's more for the generation afterwards who know already how to use the basic. And I don't even understand what the master student is doing, but he's very efficient in speed. But yeah, but that's not how it started. I wanted to see not specific for one device how it works, but rather, extend the whole range of them. So I'm thinking, why would I need, if I want to use my phone, it's right next to me, and I'm using the touchpad on my laptop, why would I need to switch over? I could just look at the device. I can just look at the slides and use the phone that I have in my hand or whatever is in my hand. Why does every device work in separation? So that's kind of something I'm trying to go for in the coming time. And I guess that's
So 5 minutes ago, but there were so many issues, we gave you some extra, and thank you very much.
So I like having I have 5 different devices across my desks. And I like that. And they're all Apple products, so they all talk to each other. So I can save and move things around and paste. And I can use this computer for this purpose and then go over here, pull this up, move it here. And I find myself doing this, and it's quite productive. The thought of having it all do the same thing, I think it would drive me crazy. So how do you ever need to have different devices doing different things, and what purpose would this serve as opposed to what I'm doing?
definitely a good question. I'm not a Apple guy, really. I don't know how well it works now across devices. But what I see or I observe mostly is that it's completely isolated, like juggling wrong devices. When my students then ask me, well, what cross-device interactions are they? Like, oh, why don't we use gaze and pinch for everything? I can use in-air gestures for all of it. It's a possibility to do that, but what is missing there is that every way of interaction has its own qualities. Like, I want to still use a stylus or a pen for drawing. I want to have the simplicity of a touchscreen, but I also want to have the precision of a mouse. So all of these qualities are important to have.
No, just a question. Well, actually, I don't have a question. I just want to like your work a little bit.
Just to finish this, the challenge is still, I think, even if you have this Apple ecosystem, you can't just use your phone to interact with it or your mouse to interact with it. What if I'm on my desktop, my mouse, I just look at my watch and I can use the mouse to even do something on the watch. So all of these possibilities are still there.
Just one point, then Fred is gonna speak. The way the Apple environment works is that if I have a website open here, it can be mirrored over here very quickly. My watch talks to my laptop. So things talk to each other quite quickly. And I'm just trying to see, like, when would I want everything to be the same? Because it seems to be quite useful to have an array of, I can move so fast. When I'm working, I'm moving across these devices and I'm able to work so good. I think
I have to get the experience to understand it better, but
he is gonna go over and.
Tess, then Fabienne, but help me first because I have a hand up for I just want to really, I've watched your work a long time. Just really want to hype up the fact that you're so manically obsessive is such a wonderful thing. Because for most of us, we're lucky enough to have all our senses. Hands and eyes are crucial, but absolutely. So did you guys really notice in the very first thing with the iPad thing, you don't tap where the thing is? That was many, many years before any of these things, right? So just think your different way of thinking about it is just so important. But just like the fact that you have an iPad, you touch here, but you're looking there, so that's where it registers. I think that's just really helping us break the mold of our previous paradigms. So thank you. But I don't know.
A very just rudimentary question, basic. I understand what's capturing the gaze in a headset, but if I'm just looking at an iPad or a computer screen, what's capturing my gaze and tracking my gaze in that?
Yet, really?
Okay, so.
You have a front-facing camera.
That's right.
Yeah, I assume the camera, but I didn't know if, so I just was kind of clarifying, so the camera, to track my gaze when I'm working on an iPad, the camera has to be turned off.
I believe that in the HCI research field, it's a bit the chicken and egg thing that maybe if we understand the use cases or some advantages, then also there are more sensing capabilities there. And actually with the iPhone, I think since the iPhone X, they have some basic gaze tracking also. So maybe that will also work at some point well. As with headsets, initially it was very broken, but now it's working well. So they can go that way. I'm trusting there are a lot of people who are working on that.
Oh, I know it's okay that you don't know the answer. I was just curious. I just assumed that it was a question that everyone in the room knew the answer to but me. So that's why I asked.
Oh, yeah, that's the answer to everything.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, one answer potentially is KD Connect. It's really for interoperability between devices. So it works, but it doesn't work the way, I think it works the way you mentioned, which is like kind of unifying without being the right interaction for that interface. It's unifying, but not the way you're suggesting.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's one solution. There is an interface for this, and it works. But to illustrate how pressing what you're talking about is, so on the way here, I was in the train, I was preparing a presentation, and I have this fancy pen for XR. It's a fancy pen, and I want to use it for XR, but also at some point in the train, I didn't want to have the XR on, and I wanted to sketch on my phone. And I couldn't, it doesn't work this way, but it's stupid. Like it has the capability, it should do this. But I think we're so used to our different walled gardens and technological limitation between the platform that we just accept it. And it is fucking wrong. Like again, the device has all the technical capability to do it, And at some point, I just wanted to do like a little scribble. I don't want to type. I don't want to speak it. I wanted to sketch it. So it's a very pressing need. And I think even for like an ecological, not just intellectual, it is so wrong that we have to have yet another device for yet another. They must be able to communicate it.
I just thought you'd appreciate the story. You know, visiting Alan Kay yesterday, and he's a very serious organist. And you know, to play the organ, you use your feet, you use your hands. He had somebody design a program for his iPad that changes the pages of the music with an eye blink. And he's trained it to see his left eye and his right eye separately, not to record blinks. And he was so proud of this, and it was fantastic. Watch him do it.
Yeah, cool.
Anyone else?
One more.
Oh, yeah, one, please, I'll switch over. Thank you. No, stand here, please, so you don't come.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's talked at all about commercialization of anyone's research. Apple will patent anything that moves, and I know the US patent system allows you to patent almost anything. I just wonder if you or your university have ever looked at patenting either the gestures or the technology behind it, because clearly the Apple Vision Pro and other devices will have been using very similar things.
So there's like we have like 10 projects or something in the year, and sending all of the ideas in there would be just insanely expensive, and you never know which one of them will be used. So that's just ridiculous. I think in the States, you know, everything gets patented probably. Any.
You just want to save the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like us to take a step back, or maybe a step forward. It just depends how we look on it, because if you think about the future of the text and start going further and further into that future, past is actually catching up, right? It starts to be your present moment. In a deep time perspective, we are just on the same moment as ancient Egyptians. So I was thinking that this beautiful artwork, made not by AI, but the real person, let's just imagine that it is depicting a site of electronic literature lab of Denis Grigard 20,000 years from now.
Oh, God.
Okay, and that intriguing person is fishing out from that stream this plastic ball of Richard Holleton, Figurski at Finthorn acid that we were shown, right? There's just a tiny bit of it, but maybe this person or non-person can actually decode it. So the question is, what is the deep future of text? And I hope you can help me and us together answer that question. It should be obviously future-proof, right? How can this be achieved when humanity, Earth, as we see now, is just going to the some dictators just want to write the future of text, or the text of the future with war and death. I think we can start learning from the past, because from that perspective, the past is already here and the future is already here. And this poem from a papyrus from 1300 years before our era, and was quoted in 2 books on reading, and it's going like that. Be a scribe, engrave this in your heart, so that your name might live on like theirs. The scroll is better than the carved stone. A man has died, his corpse is dust, his people have passed from the land. It is a book which makes him remembered in the mouth of the speaker who reads him. This chant of an ancient scribe found in Egypt is astounding in its media-specific self-consciousness. This author is well aware about the differences between the stone and the papyri, about the speed and comfortable, flexible way in which papyri can be distributed. And it looks like there was also a full culture that of scribes and writing that he refers to back. So it's quite interesting. So, but he was actually quite lucky. Because most of his colleagues' texts actually did not survive. So if we actually were to think as his colleagues, what could we do to actually make sure that our texts survive this 3,000 years? We could translate our script into some other media, right? Like a stone or a cuneiform clay tablet. We can even, if we had technology, put it on metal, as Frode mentioned, that maybe we can actually start doing with the future of text. The metaphor actually of hieroglyph, which I think is a good point of departure as well here, is especially potent here. Maybe we can actually compress this text from scroll to some legible string of symbols that can travel longer in time than our scroll, that is perishable. The metaphor of the hieroglyph is especially potent here. From Stargate TV series, if you remember, to a recent book edited by Catherine Kramer, Hieroglyph. It is a semiotic device, a prototype of universal and non-linear text that let sci-fi and speculative fiction connect human and non-human intelligence, lost civilizations, and alternative histories, right, across the deep. And obviously, in the 20th century, we witness another scroll versus stone moment when digital technologies remediated the augmented print. Does the lesson from ancient Egypt mean that we should begin writing on stone or metal and when designing interactive rich text? Perhaps. Our societies still write in stone, right? When we want to commemorate a person, a group of people, or an institution who survived cataclysms, such as burning of libraries in Alexandria or burning a library by Nazis in Warsaw, Krasiński Library, beautiful collection, all gone, and that was a deliberate act. Nazi vandalism. But actually today, our stone, with our today's technology in biotechnology, can be considered to be a DNA code. Transgenic text experiments of Eduardo Katz or Christian Bock. So that's one of these nice hieroglyphs on the stela of Horemheb. Christian Bock's xenotext, for example, by encoding poems into the DNA of a bacteria, can replicate ad infinitum and survive nuclear and climate disasters. This text may indeed project an ultimate deep future of our texts if anyone is actually able to read them. What I would rather suggest for now is to when we design interactive rich text, to do it in a method that introduces graceful remediation, where all media and the material supports of accompanying objects participate in the text as a constellation. Perhaps that to either metaphorical or literal ideogram, a string of those symbols universal enough to be read and understood in a galaxy far, far away. And obviously, just as we've been demonstrated with the next example, when we come back to interactive fiction history that introduce feelings, some real objects that the readers could have in their collection, or by early hypertext examples, such as Uncle Buddy's Phantom Funhouse, it is doable. So actually, I think we can start designing and thinking about our own forms of hieroglyphs, right? There's a question, actually. That's the John McDay's Uncle Buddy's Phantom Funhouse. Where are actually these hieroglyphs, where they can be situated? Because there is a possibility that supporting object is actually in that other non-material realm, right? While designing state-of-the-art rich interactive text experience, we must ensure there is a foundation stone for future readers. I also use the word
Record. Yeah, well, there's so many different something found. And so I think that's kind of what you're hinting at. And Michael Whitmore, who was at our conference last year, is working with David Benjamin on taking Shakespeare's complete works and turning it into NFTs. So that it's
Into what?
NFTs. So it's available in this blockchain environment, not because he's trying to sell it, but it's a way to make sure it might endure in yet another. I think is interesting.
non-fungible tokens, that digital objects that people pay a lot of money. It's also an investment, right? So yes, they can last longer. But at the same time, we can think about translating or media translation into another domains, and this is one of the blockchain as a different realm where we can distribute our message. But it's also a question of compression. How do we compress, or what do we really want to say to be actually compressed into these few symbols to be moved forward? Yes.
So I was actually thinking about Deanie's presentation earlier and mentioning that, talking about the long now and how do we preserve this stuff going forward. I think one of the interesting things that she's doing with her work, she's also preserving the context. When you think about how many times we're looking at Shakespeare and we understand Shakespeare as Shakespeare through his works, there's very little context around that, in the sense of what was going on around him at that time, what was the context. I mean, there's a lot of scholarship around that, but a lot of it is guesswork in some cases because they didn't have videotape in the Globe Theater in 1699, or 1599. So, that is something that, we have to be thinking a lot about is, what is, you're right, hieroglyphics is great, but we had to find the Rosetta Stone in order to be able to understand hieroglyphics. So what happens when language changes?
With hieroglyphs as an idea, right, there's this context of universal language that perhaps, that compression of your message needs to be done to that level that you just make these few ideas to travel, because this is only what travels, the rest is just perished. So if we understand it as a metaphor of some universal symbols that you send out, then we have the problem of language and translation and the Rosetta Stone out.
Huge topic, Tess.
Do we think it could be possible at some point to write planned adaptation into the code of something so that, so that whatever the format is that we're publishing in, it updates itself to keep itself relevant in, perpetuity? Which I think probably seems a little sci-fi, but we're kind of living in sci-fi. So.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a speculative session right now. A great idea, actually, to ingrain some executable files into the code that would actually back translate to other platforms, other systems, the platform that you're expressing to your contemporary audience.
Kind of goes out to the internet, studies what's new, and adapts itself to fit it.
Exactly.
I'm so glad you asked that question on this, because that's what I'm talking about with clear text. If you have an appendix, there can be instructions in there on how to read it. There can be instructions for AI for future readers. And as you go through time, they can be updated. So if you have clarity, you can have actions. Fabian.
As to bounce back on this, and I think as a potential solution, actually, the Internet Archive, old games, they also put the emulator with the game. And it sounds like you put a virtual computer with the data, but because data at this scale is so cheap, it actually works. So you have your virtual computer, same like for my little experiment here. As a backup, I had a virtual computer. I could
hold you to that. I will hold you to that when we work.
You can put
a computer in there.
You can put a computer with the data because you run emulators. There's computer in the computer. It sounds nuts, but it's not a big. The adaptability of it, this I don't know.
We're living in nuts.
We need to get rid of rubbish software like PHP, which is completely unreadable in the Internet Archive.
SEO.
Preserve meaning or form.
Pardon?
Preserve meaning or meaning and form. Because LLM already kind of doing that. You can compress all the text and stuff, but you lose the form. That's our memory.
Actually, I'm writing about ontology and epistemology combined, but that scribe's poem, that poem, Egyptian poem, is actually touching us because of its meaning.
What's the form?
This is what travels. Actually, he made it. He made it through to us, but it's just unbelievable, the semantics of it.
That's something.
It's gotta be real quick because we're on.
We're out of time. I think how expensive the form is to produce controls what decides what meaning is worthwhile before this digital era. Like carving something into the stone was really, really expensive. So the ontology of the form and who's willing to pay for it to be produced is what decides what meaning is worth preserving.
And on that note, thank you, Lawrence.
Yeah, as opposed to digital, which is formless.
Okay, so I'm going to shift a little bit from thinking about tech and think about culture and how we use tech and how we communicate. I'm a creative writer. I work with narrative. Narrative is my jam, and I do interactive digital narrative. And most of my research is practice-based. So I'm creating interactive digital narratives in order to figure out what they say about narrative and ourselves and knowledge and how we talk to one another. So this project, this paper comes from a project that I've been working on for some time. And I'm going to present it in a certain order, but that order is not the order in which it was developed. It was developed originally as an exploration of being able to publish commercially interactive digital narrative. You can't go on to Amazon.com right now and search for hypertext or hypernovels. Well, if you search for hypernovel, you're going to get me. But I wanted to see if can we use these mainstream channels to publish more interactive digital stuff. And I found myself in a slightly different direction after a few years of working on this and having had some personal experiences as well as some things that happen on the world stage that really influenced what I was thinking about, what I was doing, and I saw it coming out in this work. So this has drawn me as I examine that process, examine how I was thinking or how I am thinking and how I have changed over the last few years in working on this project. This has drawn me into the work of Ellen Cixous, who framed the concept of la couture féminine, and I'm very sorry for the French speakers in the room for my pronunciation. In The Laugh of the Medusa in 1976, she framed this idea that women's writing is something different. We can't define what it is, but we can say that there are some different things that are happening with it. And she sort of reclaimed the monstrous. So she took the notion of the Medusa as a monster that must be conquered by our conquering hero, Hercules, and reclaimed that monstrous to say, she's beautiful, she's not a monster. She was persecuted, she was oppressed by this heroic narrative. She's not deadly, she's beautiful, and she's laughing. And so that's where I'm jumping off of here, is to think about not just the Medusa, but the monstrous multitudes. And so I'm going to a cousin of Medusa in thinking about the Lernaean Hydra as the metaphor for what I'm thinking about. Interestingly enough, I have a personal crusade against Francis Bacon. I think he invented a lot of what is harmful now in our current society, not the least of which is empiricism and this imperialist approach to knowledge, which is that I'm right, you're wrong. There's universal truth, and dang it, rich white Englishmen are the ones who are who know what it is, which is interesting. If you kind of look around this room, you still see it, and it is interesting too. There's one woman on the wall, but she is a white woman, and white women have historically occupied this liminal space between the dominant hegemony and sort of everyone else, the global majority, as it were. And they, from this liminal position, they have been able to do things like write and publish in the 18th century, and to earn the right to vote, et cetera, et cetera. But as opposed to this sort of optimistic view, we have to remember that largely they also gatekept this, we also gatekept this privilege that we were given. If you look at the history of 18th century literature, they were often policing each other and judging one another way more harshly than the men perhaps judged them. That was pretty harsh too. And we still do this in spheres like fan fiction and women climbing the ladder and then kicking it out from underneath them, this sort of metaphor, that sort of thing. I think we've seen it. It's been sort of eloquently written about in Down Girl, in terms of, there we go. Sorry, I'm back to you. And as we see what happened with, my father always asked me, why do white women vote for Trump? Well, it's because white men vote for Trump. We want to go with that powerful association. So women's writing has been talked about as polyvocal, using lots of unnatural narratives, writing from outside the norm. And so it's always been problematic. It's always been hard to define. And so if we look at that, that translates well into the digital spheres. Part of women's writing is also, and now I'm going to branch out and beyond just women, is what we call archontic fiction. And this comes from Derrida, but Abigail Derecho has applied it specifically to fan fiction, this notion that we have a text as a foundation and then we build on it, this intertextuality. And it is definitely feminized. When the dominant hegemony does fan fiction type stuff, TV writing, for example, if you want to get into a TV writer's room, you write a little bit of fan fiction of that TV show and you hand it into them. It's a professional calling card, whereas when women do it, it's fan fiction and it's derivative and you're amateur and you're not talented and no one should publish it, et cetera, et cetera. But this is what has exploded with online communities, is this archontic fiction writing in the form of fan fiction, creepypastas, social media narratives, narratives which I have called dissonant fabulations that occur in, say, reviews for products. If you've ever been to the Bic for Her Pen reviews on Amazon, you will see some interesting feminist writing on that particular product. And so this is the type of stuff that comes from popular culture, doing with what they're given, but resisting it. So this has led me to the notion of a Hydraen narrative. Not so much Medusa, but enabling the many, many heads of the Hydra to represent not just one portion of our culture, but many different portions, but not glomming them together as one. So, and the Hydra is irrepressible. The Hydra was actually unkillable. He never killed the Hydra. He buried it. He cut off heads and then had his nephew, so he didn't really accomplish the labor himself. His nephew cauterized the heads as he cut them off, and then even he was unable to kill the body. He buried it, and so that it couldn't rise again. And then eventually it was the poison on his own blade from the Hydra's blood that killed Hercules. And so this works quite well for me in that these are narratives or creative forces that are plural, regenerative, chthonic, which is underworldlian, and irrepressible. Hydraen works multiply, weaving connections, and that textile reference is deliberate, and proliferating under suppression, reclaiming forms of knowledge and expression historically demonized as monstrous, feminine, queer, or chaotic. So it's this resistant, irrepressible quality of narrative that I'm interested in. The project that I was working on, that I'm still working on, is Seven Sisters Unmet. It's about 7 different characters in 7 different alternative storylines, parallel worlds, to draw from the many worlds hypothesis of physics, and to see how their stories compare to one another. I won't read you all of this, but this is how the story got pulled together. This is the frame story, and it's based on a scientist who is called a raveler, which both means to unravel and to ravel, who is unraveling these stories in order to study them. And so this became a polyphonic work, a polyvocal work, an unnatural work, a nonlinear work, a work that resists closure. There is no ending. And it's to put it forward as this type of work in resistance. It also, as we see, as in the shape of that raveler, that scientist, it is a representation of knowledge. That scientist, if we look at this last paragraph, I choose to write these stories as novels because I'm looking at the mid 20th century. That was the sort of a technology of the age. An art of creation enables a deeper, more complete connection to the subject matter. And a novel seemed in keeping with the era examined. So each of these 7 stories are told through a novel that interconnects in different ways through hypertext in XML, which is then published as an EPUB. And so this also represents a Hydraen approach to knowledge, in that knowledge isn't positivist, it isn't empirical. Sometimes it's experiential, sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's subjective. And quite often it's subjective, and this is what we're often losing in our current models. And that's it. I hope.
Wow. All right, you were first, Mariusz.
How is the collaboration and collaboration software fit with that idea of Hydraen?
It's difficult. What is interesting online is how people collaborate without collaboration software. So a lot of these traditions are starting from making do with what they have, such as blogs. If we think about fan fiction community, which starts largely online on things like LiveJournal and things like that. And then they created a space of their own, literally called an archive of our own. Because if people kept, white men, they've literally been quoted as saying white men kept trying to make money off of us. And so the difficulty is, and this is why I asked the question about collaboration, because there isn't very much that allows collaboration. There isn't very much that allows popular collaboration. You get wiki texts like the SCP Foundation, which if you're all interested in science fiction and conspiracy type narratives, I recommend the SCP Foundation. And creepypastas, which SCP Foundation is a wiki. It is moderated. It has some editors who make sure that the story world and things, but it's mostly just let's keep it within the story world, not get too wild with it. And then creepypastas they've been called the folk tales of the interweb, which they emerge on forums largely. Somebody tells a story, somebody else does another artistic contribution until you get Slender Man, which then has effects on everyday culture. So the software itself, not very collaborative, but what people do with it is.
Alexandra, you had
more of a comment, but I really appreciate this because I also think it echoes a lot of what we've been dancing around today is this sequential, not sequential nature of things. Like there's no replacement, and you're talking about women's writing being considered this exterior look into this activity that's been so hegemonic, but there's also a little bit of assimilation for that. I mean, like Hannah Grace and Icebreakers was an archive of our own text that's now hugely successful and published through traditional channels of publication. And then now we're kind of using the same rhetoric to discuss queer writing as if that were the new outsider, but that's also going to move it, but it doesn't, none of them replaces the prior, and they continue to, anyway, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Have you tried Figma? We're using Figma in our program to work collaboratively in Figma.
Okay.
And design text. It's just really cool. And what people are experimenting with are like traditional business software, like Martin Lisa did with Excel and PowerPoint, using those now with Google Slides and with Google Docs, Figma, all of those, Excel, all of those can be utilized for storytelling.
Absolutely. I will look at that as well.
So how do you make the intersections visible? And I think that would be a really
intersections of
7 stories. So, you say they have overlap, but it would be really, I don't know if there's a way to make that, one of the problems with, as Nelson calls it, jump links is you're dumping into the blind. You don't see what's on the other side until you're there. It would be really cool to be able to see that visually as an object of where these stories fuse.
It would be. It's somewhat difficult with the technology that we currently have. So the lost a word. I'm perimenopause. The restrictions or the limitations that I've given to myself is that it needs to go into something that everybody can access. So I've been working in XML and EPUB, which means that this fancy technology that we're all talking about here, nuh-uh. And in fact, when I first started working on it, Amazon was still using Mobi files, which are more restricted. So we're talking about the links that make footnotes or table of contents links. So it's very rudimentary. And in fact, I have to do some pretty sly tricks to get people, you know, if I'm doing it, I did a couple of pilot stories, hypertext in Mobi. And in order to get people to stop just turning the page instead of clicking a link like they would need to with Twine, I had to do some fancy stuff because it still doesn't like to have blank pages in it. So it is still that effect of you're going to jump into a story that you're not sure of.
The Amazon handcuffs.
Exactly.
Okay, Anne, go ahead.
Like really shocking that it took till the 70s for like Virago to happen. It was like a center for really important voices of that era. So in the sea of noise that there is online at the moment, how do the really vital voices of today of whatever outlying community, how do they make themselves heard?
It's a really good question, and both Sue and Elaine Showalter, who looked at women, who sort of talked about women's writing, and Joanna Russ note that every generation has to do this all over again because the discussions don't enter into mainstream, and so it's all forgotten again. I wish I had had any of these readings that are in my references as text when I was studying. I have a degree in literature. I have a degree in creative writing. I have a PhD, and in none of these, it was all Barthes and Foucault and all of this, but not Cixous or any of the others. And I think it would have helped a lot. But I think that some of these technologies that are allowing these communities to come together means that we're talking to one another more, and we're able to be, I think that, you know, the talk about the newer generations being more cognizant of things like feminism and stuff like that helps, but I don't know yet.
So fully acknowledging my white male status. Really. This is so important, and I want to thank you for highlighting it. The technology is all great and everything, but you know, we're living in a time of identities that are just weird. So I have an 8-year-old, and most of you know, heard about too much, but how do I tell him this notion of, some people say that English is an ethnicity. I mean, what the actual, right? And also, all these nonsense issues, the only way we've dealt with him is to say, if you identify yourself as one thing, whether that's where you were born, where your parents are from, what football club you like, what language you know, if you pick one, it's silly. Right? So to be able to integrate this, if we don't do this, we don't grow, right? And I think from my perspective as a white man, I think a lot of it comes from insecurities, because in a discussion, I would probably tell you guys, I am different in this way and that way, which is not on the surface level, right? So therefore it becomes nonsense. So I want to just thank you. This is core to what we're trying to do in the community. Thank you.
Yeah, it makes me feel better that I'm not doing XR and VR and cool fancy stuff.
The copy of this, and yes, of course.
Yes, and I'm going to writing software and all this. No, but if you say it's the, I was mentioning agency and open source and all this before. The whole point of it is again not to embrace the technology as like we must use it, but is to challenge like positions of domination. That you don't have to use the software as it's done. You can challenge it. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying any of that, but that this piece of software is precisely to be not to constrain in any way. And I think it's specifically, I mean, it's for everyone. We're all oppressed in some ways. And I think we can fall back to tech that makes some of it convenient, but I think it's not what I would recommend, especially if the whole purpose of the work is to highlight some notion of domination.
Absolutely. Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Vincent Murphy.
I heard a really interesting fact yesterday. Over 500 years, Oxford and Cambridge sustained a deliberate, very successful campaign to prevent any other university being established. For 500 years, they managed to prevent any university. Now, that's a good way of getting rid of the competition, just make sure you don't even have a training ground. But they don't tend to highlight that on their how great they live in the world. Anyway, right, that's probably eaten into my 5 minutes. Okay, I'm not having slides, so I think easy needs to read some slides, but just okay. Twilight of the Printocene. It's getting very difficult to refute that we're not living in the midst of an extraordinary period of human development. And it's one with all the hallmarks of being some kind of genuine inflection point for what we mean by human cognition. So for context and alacrity, so my contention is that actually has been 3 other similar inflection points. And all 4 of these have revolved around exactly the thing that's brought us all here. So for context and alacrity, first, how are we with Shannon information theory? I'm sure we've heard people mention it. I'm going to very quickly, a very quick and dirty and terrible injustice. It's a great joke. I thought it was. Okay, so information can be deemed as the amount of surprise or novelty in any message. Okay, the greater the degree of unexpectedness or surprise, the more information the message can contain. Okay, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, very little information in there. Oh my God, an alien's just materialized behind you. Small amount of message, large amount of information, because there's lots of unexpectedness. So thus we can frame all tools and tech as things that enable us to enhance the extraction of novelty. Surprise. And humans have developed thousands of tools, but only 23 of them are deemed general purpose technologies. Now, to be a general purpose technology, you've got to be civilizationally changing, and it's got to be very difficult to predict its future. So we know the obvious ones: the plow, fire, electricity, steam. Now, AI was very quickly deemed general purpose technology because of the changes it was having. But I think we can all agree it's having changes at a dramatic effect that an awful lot of technologies prior to it have not had that kind of society. So if you run the Shannon information lens through all 23 of those general purpose technologies, it reveals a subset which share even rarer set of capabilities. So where most general purpose technologies extract from a single domain, few, such as fire, have multiple domains. Only 4 are entirely omni-domain. They can extract surprise out of any domain you point them at. And you will be very familiar with what those are. Those are language, writing, print, now AI. Okay? So omni-domain information extraction technology. Basically, they are very, very different than all other technologies. So different, we now call them cognologies because they act with our cognition as opposed to acting on power. And they massively expand our cognition. So each cognology transforms not merely what humans know, but how they know. Cognology redefines how humans perceive information itself. It's what has happened in 12 principal features and similarities between all of the technologies. Rattled through them very quickly. I'm very happy to talk about them. They're all... So they fundamentally change the rules of the games of society. They're information-based rather than energy-based. They subsume their predecessor within exponentially less time each time. Shorter. 50 years, we went from manuscript had been around for over 1,000 years. In Incunabula, within 50 years, manuscript was pretty much done as a form of communication. It is even shorter. We're now we're just 3 years in, which is why you hear a lot of people saying 2030. Now, what also happens, luckily, is that the predecessor assumes elder status. It assumed a more reverent place in society. If you think about me talking now, we reserve talking for the most important things. We're going to break up with somebody if you're going to tell somebody, if you're going to ask somebody to marry them, if you're going to do it in a church, you do it in front of them. You use voice. You're seen as not right unless you have to, if you do it another way, okay? Manuscripts, as we know, the documents that we now treasure and keep, they have taken that. Books are already started. If you think of first editions, you think of signed copies, etc. Have already started to assume a reverend kind of status. That will continue. So one of our things is how do we continue to bring print into that elder status and treat it with the respect it needs? Okay. It triggers exponentially higher order complexity in any existing encounters. It combines predictability with radical unpredictability. So you think books became standardized, but out of it came the Reformation. Okay, so they're able to induce this enormous amount of unpredictability. They contain capacity to provide viable solutions to problems that are emergent from themselves. If you think in the case of print, literacy, we needed to have literacy. Suddenly the printing press is, we need people to be able to read and write. The only thing that was capable of producing standard textbooks was the printing press itself that we all adhere to. Copyright, that wonderful 17th century response to a 15th century invention that we're now all trying to hammer onto a 21st century. But it was, again, there's no concept of copyright because there was nothing to copy, but only print was capable of making standard copies of copyright laws to have them distributed. So it causes problems, but then it's the only thing that can actually solve them. We're going to see that with AI. Democratization of access and power. It massively flattens the hierarchies that came before. We can expect AI to do exactly the same, addressing a lot of the previous speakers' issues around those. AI is a perfect opportunity to giving voices to those people who previously have not genuinely had voices or access to power. It enables entirely new cultural and social frameworks. It fundamentally accelerates knowledge sharing and innovation, radically transforms traditional and previously supposedly embedded power structures, acts as a catalyst for new ethical frameworks, and accelerates feedback loops and thus exponentially increases ever higher order complex problem-solving processes. Things get really, really complex with every new cognology. So we can expect massive amounts of more complexity. So what are they doing? So I could say we are all members of the Cognizine era. All of us. That's why we're having, one of the reasons we are having such a problem getting our heads around AI, because it's a new way of looking at the world. There's an old saying, it's a very true saying, you cannot fully understand a culture you weren't born into. We were not born into the AI culture. Young people, my son's 12 years old, he's on the verge where he views information different than we do. All of us, and have done for the last 600 years, we have viewed information as stable, scarce, and sacral. They, young people, and within AI, information becomes soft, diffuse, and secular. It doesn't have the same resonance, and we are having that problem tackling. We see somebody scribble in a book that's not belonging to them. We instantly, we think, oh my God, they should be struck by lightning. We have a reverence for books that has come from 600 years of print. They don't. And if we insist on imparting our view of information, we are setting them up to fail. They are in a new world. They're in a world of information abundance. We have come from an information where it works for us. All of our structures are to keep information scarce and sacred. It's hard to hear. This is why when I usually come to these things, I always read this quote from Sophocles, one line, 2,500 years ago. To speak of myself first, I never did it, sir, nor saw who did. No one can punish me for that. The very first instance in human history of somebody saying, don't shoot the messenger. So I often have to, it doesn't matter if I'm talking to businesses, academics, etc. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is a new way of looking at things. So I'm working with education trusts. How fast will I speak? It's called From Literacy to Ludicity. So we have developed a framework for enabling a 21st century and beyond version of what we consider as literacy. It's how to use AI. Please look at my website. It has all the information around it. It's called Ludicity, and it is something we have to impart on every single person now, in the same way as literacy is how you survive we have survived for 600 years and flourished. I think I've probably got about 10 seconds left.
No, yeah, you can have a minute or two. Okay, thank you.
So, we must steward the old, we must teach the new. We have to look in both directions. And for me, it's trying to reframe and saying, look, the future of text is a behavioural space. It's no longer something we read, it's something we inhabit, negotiate and co-create. And our most pressing task is to build these competencies, which is where Ludicity comes in to show how people can actually activate, because so many people don't have a narrative around AI. They cannot get their heads around it. You guys are absolutely the closest to the forefront how it works. So very, very final. You can never fully understand culture we weren't born into. But Orson Welles, we are all born saint and sinner. Each of us, both an angel and a demon. The trick is to recognize them, not reconcile them. Don't try and reconcile yourself as being from the Printocene era. Oh my God, I've got to try and understand. No, just recognize you have a foot in both camps. Your mind possibly works completely in Printocene, but it's going to be it's going to be difficult for you to get your head around an AI mindset, and that's going to exponentially change. But nobody has a better opportunity exploring those ways than you guys here. Final. Claude Shannon, he said, genuine communication can only occur between equals. That is another foundation stone of information theory. And if AI is doing its job, if it makes genuine communication and more equals, that's what it should do, because that's what the printing press done. That's what each of the cognologies has done.
Beautifully.
What I tell my students, I mean, they live in a different culture, as you point out, but I think the beauty of the generation we are in is that we have a foot in each world, right?
Absolutely.
And so we're the transitional, transitional objects. And we're helping them move from point A to point B, or understand the past and so I see that's our job. And even if I don't completely understand their world and they don't understand mine, we are translating the two together. And I think that's valuable.
It's absolutely invaluable. It really is. And I try to do it again with the teachers I work with, saying to them and the education trusts, none of you teachers signed up for this. You signed up for the old literacy way, because that's how you. And now you've suddenly got this thing saying, oh, you've now got to teach all these children a completely different way of looking at the world. And so it's giving them the tools to do that and helping them on their journey and saying, it sucks. We have that Japanese, but you live in interesting times. We all do. We have to deal with it.
Just an observation. Good old-fashioned text is really, I'm stunned by the fact here you're quoting Socrates, you're quoting text from a pharaonic papyrus. Shakespeare has come up a couple of times. We cited all of these collective beacons of wisdom from the past because their communications were within us in text.
Absolutely.
And I mean, the Printocene, as you refer to it, I think has helped us popularize the availability of this the collective wisdom. And therefore, I'm not very convinced of where we're going in the future with a lot of TikTok videos and things like that. Whereas the reflection on what the text was and was communicated to us enables us to reflect and to see ourselves in different ways than just reading. I mean, the reason we cite these quotations and so on is because they cast light on our own concerns in a profound way. And again, good old-fashioned text has been the way to connect it. So I'd like a comment on where do you see this going?
I have a question.
Okay. No, I am an incredible book lover. I'm massively James Joyce. I have many editions of James Joyce as I possibly can. My most precious gift is a small ostracon, which a friend gave me from the 1930s, which was found in a fire pit. And it has it has the Proto-Sumerian symbol for wheat. The very first, and it sits on my desk on top of my Mac. I would love to give that to the guy or the woman or the person at the time and say to them, keep going, this is where you get to. This is what we've done. We've got ourselves in order. But we need to give it elder status. We need to give it, and to, so many people don't have a story for how text has emerged. We speak with very great articulation about it. People are worried about AI, where it's going. Do you have to know, how do you know where you're going if you don't know where you've been? And we need to give people a narrative and say, this is all part of a journey of us expanding total information space, all of the amount of surprise that human beings are able to extract solutions, all of their answers to their issues and things started with language, moved around, and each time our information space gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but we have to learn to be good stewards of that space.
For context, Ismail's the founder of the Modern Library of Alexandria. So you have the past and the future. The earlier thing you said, you have to be born into culture to understand it.
Fully understand, it's 100%.
Right.
Yes.
That goes by. When I was at Syracuse University, there was a teacher who said, truth kills creativity. Could never find his name, but I think that's really important in balance, because once something is, it is, by questioning, right? So in our industry, once you have a GUI, you have a GUI. That's it. You know, why question it? It is the truth, it's reality, it's the objective. Well, of course not, but that's how it's culturally seen. What is so incredible about our time, I know half of you heard me say this before, but I have to say it anyway, this is the only time in the history of our species where we are entering XR and where we're entering an age of AI. Those who will come after us will be born into it. So for them, whatever the hell we do will be their truth. We're the only ones who have the balance between what the heck is it, to invent what it is, because those who came before us, they could dream it up, but they couldn't actually put the darn thing on, right? Well, that is why it's so important we deal with AI, which I find a bit of a mind app. I'm so grateful for the presentation and to remind us of how we need to do things. Thank you. I believe Bob has a question.
Not a question so much as a critique. I find your talk profoundly disturbing. Let me explain why. About 10 years ago, I read a book by John Seeley Brown and John Hagel, and it was all about the future of technology, of education, etc. And I realized as I was reading it that as wonderful as the world they were describing, it was a world for about 500 million people. For the 1% and the rest of us that are required to make the world that that 1% wants to live in. And I see AI coming in a way that will basically make most of humanity redundant. And while I applaud your vision of what could be, I am deeply concerned about the other 8.5 billion.
Absolutely, but my point of contention is always going to be, look how much of the world was in misery before the print. There was no art, nobody made money from whatsoever. A few, maybe a couple of troubadours, maybe some quarter pointy things. There was nobody making music or dancing or paintings or what have you. Nobody was doing that because you were so scrabbling around trying desperately to make your. There was the only artists were those who were appointed by the state. There was nobody making a living out of art. And we have to take that most people lived a life of grinding poverty, which they do today. 80% of the world does not go to university. They are doing drudgy, boring factory work. We have an opportunity to release those people. We release everybody from that drudgery.
Listen, Dave.
I just want to piggyback on that, which is that I don't, to your point, it's like when, and people in America talk about going back to the good old days. Well, it was good for a very small portion of people. Which isn't to say that today's great shakes for a lot of people either. So I guess the thing is that there is intense suffering in the world we're already inhabiting. Will AI make it worse? I don't know, but for a lot of people, it's already terrible. So I think it's sort of a perspective. I feel like it's a perspective thing to think
I have to say,
Your
even
point, I'm agreeing with you, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, that might have been obtuse.
our economic perspectives, the way that we look at economics, we all came out of the printing press. There was no paper money, there was no structured corporations or businesses, there was no contracts you signed for a job, etc. All of this 9 to 5, everything we think about, even down to Protestant work ethic. That's because Luther managed to use the printing press to put in this idea that you work hard and you get rewarded for your hard work. All of these are modern inventions of the printing press. There's nothing to say AI and the work that comes out won't utterly reinvent our conceptions, but we can't even conceptualize that in the same way as a medieval peasant not conceptualized the modern world. It's too out of our reference. And so, you know, we have to say that.
On the same page. Sorry. Question.
Question about literacy. So I agree completely about kind of a new form of literacy. And actually that's happened before, actually, computer literacy, web literacy, digital literacy, and literacy. I think one of the interesting things and the differences about AI is that AI literacy requires good old-fashioned literacy.
Yes, original.
Because you need those skills to critically engage with AI properly.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, the technology destroys the tasks and activities that build those skills. And that hasn't happened before. So we're living in a really interesting transitional period where we have a body of people, a current population, who have those literate skills and will encounter AI. But the next generation won't necessarily have them unless we're very careful to kind of build it in. And I just wondered how you thought like we could bridge that gap.
So the recapitulation. So obviously, first then we learn to write, then we learn. So we always build upon, we always layer the next one on. In terms of how we deploy those skills, I'm just going to tie it that we often get people saying, you will often hear people, what are we going to do? I've got no purpose. I said, have you ever walked into a playground? Have you ever seen bored children? We'll always find things to do. We are the most creative species.
I'm going to rush you along because we have 2 more questions. Please, Ismail, and then Andrea.
I just want to follow up on that. I think I gave a keynote speech to librarians who were very concerned about what AI will do. It will abolish their jobs and so on. And I gave them a very simple and real example. We used to have accountants. We used to work with a pencil and paper, with sums, and enter it into things. When the electronic calculators came, people said 80% of the jobs are going to disappear because one accountant with a calculator can do the job of 5 accountants. Guess what? We have more accountants than ever. We have more students studying accounting. The salaries are going up, and they're not doing the same work, they're doing something very different. For me, that's what's going to happen with AI. Yes, it will make the old-fashioned work insignificant and redundant, but it will open up a new way of working that wasn't there before. And I think the case of accounting and how I learned things in school which I can never use again. I mean, how to extract the square root with a pencil and paper. Well, who the hell wants that kind of skill anymore? but I mean, when even your telephone has an electronic calculator in it. But we were able to do a lot more things than exactly. I think that's where it's not going to destroy the layering part is very important, but also it opens up new possibilities of doing things which didn't exist before. Last word on that. People say 25% of the jobs are going to disappear. Yeah, but 35% new jobs will be created. But they're not the same people who can go from here to there. True. But guess what? We're going to have a 4-day week. That removes 20% of the jobs right away. And
over to Andrea, since over time.
They use our time for playground.
Break for coffee in a second, but Andrea, really briefly.
Just 2 really quick observations. First, I see a lot AI being subject in sentences, like AI is going to property, is going to take away jobs. And I feel like it's the time for a little Marxism. AI is not going to do anything. It's the modes of production in which AI is embedded in that might lead to those things, not AI. And the second observation, really quickly, I think it's interesting that all the technologies that you've listed, aside from natural language, which I think is part of the body and evolution, have not led to any qualitative change, as the quote that you've just read from the ancient Greeks show. So if you read the ancient Greeks, they're 2,000 years old, and their wisdom is as sharp as the sharpest wisdom we have today. So all of these technologies, all of these quote unquote improvements we're speaking of apply purely to the imperialist, capitalist, communist, and so on modes of production. They do not apply to the qualitative aspects of human cognition because it hasn't changed or improved in over 2,000 years.
And on that note, coffee.